Emma, it's lovely to see you. I'm in
You
Dublin.
too, Dave.
You're in Canada. Um, uh, I should say that my sister Emma is a celebrated Irish author of Room and many other works, including the screenplay for Room. And I am hugely proud of everything she has achieved. And it's my great pleasure to take part in this Christmas conversation.
I feel the same way. I get to introduce my brother Dave. I'm the youngest of our 8, by the way, and he's the oldest of our 8. And Dave is the one in our family who I feel most proud of as having made most of a difference in the real world. Recently of Foreign Affairs, where he was Ireland's permanent representative to the UN, and before that, Russia, Austria, I believe, Italy, Germany, and the Northern Irish peace process. So delighted to be doing our first public event together.
Indeed, it's a long time coming. It's going to be a strange Christmas, Emma, I suppose, for everyone. Strange in Ireland, strange in Canada, and we all have to make huge sacrifices. And I think in particular of the many Irish people abroad who are unable to come home to see their loved ones as they normally would. And the media are full of examples of the kind of sacrifices people have had to make. What's it like in London, Ontario, in your end? What's your sense of the mood about Christmas in this very strange year?
It is indeed a weird experience. I would say COVID hasn't been too bad so far where I am in London, Ontario, but it's currently getting worse in our second wave. Our area has just gone from orange into red, which means things like no more than 5 people allowed in a home. Everyone feels as if they're hunkering down. You know, I've started, say, ordering our groceries delivered again, that kind of thing. Everyone's trying to stay cozy for the year. But oddly enough, though, isn't it strangely unifying too? I mean, a lot of us are far apart from each other, but we're going through the same thing. So yes, I don't feel, physically close or able to see a lot of my loved ones, but it's sort of as if we're all suffering from something like a broken leg simultaneously. I feel quite a sense of connection with, say with sister in California, sister in Dublin. And I feel like we're all going through many of the same things, much more than during a traditional Christmas.
That's right. Yeah. No, there is a sense of solidarity. I think in some countries it's probably stronger than in others. But Ireland being a relatively small society, I think there's a real sense here of a kind of common purpose that we all have to serve. But nevertheless, this is the time of the year when people normally would be thinking of family reunions. You and I have, it's a long time since our family had a collective Christmas gathering because most of us are scattered around the world and, for a number of reasons it hasn't been possible to have a gathering. But we did have one a couple of years ago when Dennis, our father, turned 90, and it's good to think that at least at the other end of a Zoom, we can connect with each other. And I imagine a Zoom Christmas is what most people would be relying on this year. Do you feel as close, let's say, to Barbara, our sister in California, or to Stella, our sister in London, as you would to the rest of us in Ireland?
Well, it's funny, geography doesn't seem to much matter at the moment. People are either, your next door neighbour who you're talking to across the fence, or else everyone's in the Zoom space. And in many cases, I'm in touch more. I notice I'm ringing our father more often than I did before COVID. I'm making more of an effort to make those connections. Again, there are friends who I usually would have relied on those meetings a couple of times a year, maybe friends in the other London and in Britain. But I've been having weekly Zoom sessions with them. So strangely enough, I think COVID has poked a lot of us to actually get around to reaching out to the people we care about. And as you say, that sense of kind of almost a wartime solidarity, it's a form of a bond. I mean, we'd all prefer to be sitting around chatting in an overheated room together, but these virtual connections are a lot better than nothing.
They have, yeah, they do indeed. Once you can master the technology, in my case, how are Finn and Una, your children, responding to the particular challenges of this Christmas?
I've been really impressed because for young people, it's an awful lot of them being really, really careful for the sake of others, because not many young people feel any real danger from this illness themselves. And yet they're going to enormous lengths to make sure that the rest of us and that the older generation don't get it. So Finn and Una, for instance, when they go to school here, it's still in person, but it's in masks all day. Which, I go in a shop for 5 minutes with a mask on and I'm feeling a bit, irritated by it. And they're in masks all day with their friends, and all these elaborate rules like which way. My daughter has to go left down the corridor to get to the bathroom, which is on the right, because it's a one-way flow system. So, their flexibility is amazing. I would say Una, who's 13 now, what keeps her going is virtual theatre. Her kids theatre company went entirely online in March, and she's been in some kind of play ever since. She's been doing online classes with, say, teachers who are in New York, the kind of thing you couldn't usually do, but because it's all in the Zoom space, it's possible, because geography is mattering less at the moment for that kind of thing. And the big thrill for Finn at 17 has been he can now drive our car on his own, which gives him a little glimpse of that kind of adult autonomy that is otherwise being rather taken away by COVID, because it's a time of, no parties and he can't just go see his friends. But getting out there in the car, even in the snow, is a great little promise of future freedoms when all this is over.
That's terrific. So they're both they're making good use of the kind of lockdown conditions.
What about your grandchildren, Dave? I wonder what it's like for younger ones.
They're living in London, and it's in fact London has just gone now to the highest category of measures. So they have to, put up with a fairly locked down Christmas. One thing I was amused by recently was that the school play, which when you mention Una and her virtual theatre, the school play in Molly's school had to go, of course, online. But that meant that the teachers were in a position to provide far more characters than the mere nativity play would normally allow for. So Oscar, the grandson, in fact, told me that he was the host for the Christmas play, and I imagined in my innocence some sort of piece of religious bread or something. But I realised that he was given the task of opening the online event, and then Molly was actually meant to be the innkeeper's wife. Again, I'm wondering who was even the innkeeper in the traditional narrative, but she obviously had to be given an invented part to give, so they would all feel that they belonged. Anyway, there were these little adjustments had to be made. What about parties, Emma? Do Finn and Una miss just the sheer physical getting together in a Christmas party situation, or
like if they get together with their friends, just a few friends, say ice skating outside, they come back going like, oh, it's so nice to see my friends again, in some context out of school. But there's not that much of it. I mean, I think they realized that they just have to keep on being patient. And since March, we've been saying, oh, just a few weeks more, just a few months more, which of course, these are enormous chunks of time in their lives. So I'm most sympathetic to the young, and also to older people for whom, to tell them to be careful for a year, that may be 1 year out of just a couple of years they have left. So I think there's a strain on both the young and the old that those of us in the middle aren't feeling, because, our perspective is much more long-term than our kids, but yet we tend to assume we've got plenty of time ahead, which older people can't. So yeah, I'm most sorry for the young and the old this Christmas.
But do the young people not get disappointed then when they find that deadlines they had been half promised come and go, and they still have to endure lockdown? I mean, do they find optimism in this situation? I sometimes wonder. I mean, the rest of us kind of put up with it in a grumbling way, but as you say, time is going by for children, I just wonder, can they muster the kind of patience that we know we've no choice but to muster?
I think they're pragmatic rather than patient. I find kids nowadays are very attuned to what's going on in the world, much more than I was at 13. I mean, I don't think I read a newspaper till I was about 18, but through social media, our kids are always aware of the latest, say woke issue or social protest, or if there's a police killing or something, they'll hear about it before I will. So I think they're very aware of it, and they're very scientific in their mindset too. So they know we didn't really promise them any particular freedoms. We just said, oh, hopefully things will get better. But they're all too aware of the facts of the situation, and they care deeply about whether older people or more vulnerable people catch this illness. So I found our kids really have not been rebelling against COVID. They know that we're not just making up these rules. It's not like ordinary adult rules. They know it's just how it is. And they're very internationalist in their awareness too. I mean, you might say social media, it's a bit of a jumble of facts from all over the world, but it means they don't see things just as a Canadian kid or just as a British kid or an Irish kid. They're highly aware of things like how it's doing in different countries, or in our case, we've been all preoccupied with the US election, and they were watching that with me, really aware that what happens in one country south of us really affects us here too. So no, I think the kids get it. It might be harder to explain to a 3-year-old why you can't kiss granny, but I think the teenagers absolutely get it, and they're showing a real resilience. And also, the online world was their world anyway, so I think they probably adjusted to that better than many of us who are just craving to shut down Zoom and be in person with our loved ones.
Do they think of themselves as, I mean, they are half Irish and half Canadian in a sense. What's their identity? I mean,
it's more complex than that, right? Because they have they could have French nationality through Chris, and they could have British nationality through Chris. They've got Irish passports, they've got Canadian passports. We didn't try and get them 4 passports, but they definitely got 2 each. And because we've been to Ireland very regularly over the years, once or twice a year at least for them, and I've cemented their Irish identity by letting them eat all their favourite junk whenever we go to Ireland. So, the taste of Ireland for them is cocktail sausages and Tato and so forth, and proper chipper chips made by Italian Dublin chipper places, that kind of thing. So, they think of it as a space of such fun and sociability that they have very warm responses. But then equally, we've taken them to live in France a couple of times, so they have a strong sense of that too. And I think they have quite a sense of being Europeans too, because we've spent lots of time and they have relatives in Ireland, England and France. I think they have a real sense of Europeanness. So they think Brexit is a terrible idea, for instance. So it's very interesting, isn't it, how you can have these multiple loyalties to countries in a compatible way.
They are effectively bilingual, aren't they? The two of them. They speak fluent French and English because of where you've educated them.
Yeah, so whenever we go to France, I'm a very verbal person, of course, and I would say in English I'm very confident. But when we go to France, I'm suddenly the dunderhead saying, ask for one of those special loaves, getting them to speak my French for me. So they love that reversal of power, Yeah, I think travel, they have missed travel, because until now we've all traveled very much. So it's been very strange to stay home and just try and enjoy the local more.
Yeah, I suffer from that a lot myself. I have to say, I had a very sort of peripatetic existence before COVID, and now basically I'm confined to barracks like everyone else. So gradually you get used to it. But I'm sure you miss the travel, and presumably you would have been able to travel within Canada as much as traveling abroad. I mean, for the children as well, they would have been used to moving around the country.
We've always been quite European focused, though, because of having so many loved ones over there, and sometimes work gigs for me, when I had a play on in the Dublin Theatre Festival, or when the Room play was on at the Abbey, we went. So we've mostly gone to Europe, and not much else. But I would say travel for me is just a part of my life. Like, my average day is just at home in my house writing my books, whereas you were the person who traveled more than anyone I know. So, for you, March must have been such a grinding of the gears, as you had to stamp on the brakes. So how did you manage?
Well, I suppose when I realised that the things I would have been going abroad for, to conferences and so on, when I saw that they were all being postponed or cancelled altogether, then I had no choice but to accept my new fate. Yeah, like everyone else, I'm trying to reconstruct my activity such as it is online, and it's working to an extent. Yeah, I mean, you miss the personal contact. It's not just the social aspect of it; it's also that the exchange of ideas undoubtedly is restricted when you only have an online option. You can't really get into sort of casual following up on particular projects if everything is formally laid out in an online setting. But bit by bit, we'll get used to it. I suppose there's the one big advantage that you have a captive audience, that people don't turn up late. There are various practical advantages. You don't get stuck in when flights are cancelled, etc. So you know that you will be able to do some business online, and that's all very good. But I suppose ultimately, Emma, we've no choice but to accept that this is the way forward.
All my book touring this year has been entirely virtual, and I've done so much more of it. So instead of, say, 2 weeks going to different cities in Canada and 2 weeks going to different cities in America and maybe one brief trip to Ireland and England, I've just been doing constant online events since March. And of course, I don't enjoy them to the same extent, but I have to say that they reach a lot of people, and people get to watch it at times of their choosing afterwards. You reach people who don't live in the big cities that are well served by author tours. And people can interact more. For instance, often while I'm giving the talk, people are putting their questions in the Q&As, and they get to upvote each other. I wish you could do that with live events, so that the one question that somebody gets to ask isn't the boring question that everybody's rolling their eyes at. It would be great if the questions could be pre-upvoted by the whole audience. But yeah, in many ways you can reach people with these events that you couldn't necessarily with an in-person one. So yeah, I'm not ungrateful. I've realized that I've been able to talk to a lot of people this year.
And the other thing is, of course, your remarkable prescience in writing The Pull of the Stars, as we all know, before the pandemic hit. But with fantastic timeliness and relevance. It must have been strange when you realised that that novel would in fact arrive at a particularly appropriate time.
You'll think me very stupid. I didn't really realise this. I was so head down finishing the rewrites of the novel, which I thought of as entirely a novel about Dublin in 1918, the Great Flu pandemic. I was so, myopically focused on that particular historical moment. And yeah, there were headlines about this virus in China, but I honestly didn't connect it at all. And then I delivered the novel and looked up, and only when my publishers wrote to me and said, it's about a pandemic, let's bring it out this summer instead of next year, I hadn't thought to connect it. I was just so immersed in that world, just trying to make, all the different things going on in Ireland in 1918 so vivid. And above all, I was trying to get the medicine right, because, if you're writing about, say, my first historical novel was about an 18th century dressmaker. So if I get some detail of 18th century fashion wrong, okay, the academics won't be happy, but nobody cares that passionately. But medicine and childbirth, you cannot be truthy about this. You have to be true. So I'd worked so hard on getting the medical stuff right. So probably early March, I was busy, fine-tuning those last details of I was talking to a midwife, for instance, about to try and get every detail right for the midwifery aspects of the book. So the last thing I was thinking was, I've written a timely novel. And I would still say I wasn't remotely prescient. It's just pure coincidence. People write about past plagues quite often, and my one just happened to come out this year. And at first, I was quite sheepish, like, I hope nobody thinks I'm trying to profit from COVID. But then I realized that I would get to do events talking about nurses and midwives and doctors and healthcare workers and hospital cleaners all year, and really celebrating them. And at that point, I started to enjoy the process, because it seems a good year to be talking so much about how we entrust our lives to those in healthcare and the sacrifices that they make to look after us.
No, I mean, there were, whether you intended it or not, or whether you saw it coming or not, there were many things which were resonant from that novel. I mean, as you say, the importance of the health service, but also the scale of the Spanish flu epidemic, which was the only real precedent, or one of the few precedents for COVID-19. So in some ways it really was the ideal novel to read in this circumstance. Also, many people saw parallels in relation to Room, or at least they saw the captivity that you described in Room as oddly comparable to what they were going through in in lockdown situations. So
I do have a thing for small rooms. That is true. And this is partly just a technical thing. I honestly find it easier to deal with, a project that has what the 17th century French playwrights would have called the unities of time, space, and action, like two people stuck in a lift. It's technically much easier to handle than some huge epic canvas. But also, it's great if your focus is on character and interaction, because people will start to... it's a bit like Brownian motion, the atoms bouncing off each other. People will interact if you keep them trapped together. And if you stay almost in real time, following their conversations word by word, and soon like little sort of in-jokes and back references to what each other said an hour ago start to build up. And I just love that intensity between characters. So I seem to have done that in a few books. Again, much of my novel, The Wonder, was set in one particular sick room in one particular cabin in 1850s Ireland. So yeah, I do love confinement. And also, I'm very interested in women's history in particular, I suppose. And women's history has often been a matter of, closed rooms. I'm thinking of, say, Greek villages I've been to where, it looks as if all the women have died in a mysterious plague, because you only see the men out and about, and then you realize all the mammies are at home making the dinner. So, women's lives have so often been confined by one political regime or another, whether the Taliban or whether other forms of patriarchy. So writing about those rooms in which people are stuck is a great way to kind of shine that light primarily on women's lives.
Absolutely. What are you working on at the moment, Emma, if you can say anything about
I can tell you it's set in early medieval Ireland. So, it's funny, I write more and more about Ireland, even though I moved abroad at 20, but that the country you spend your first 20 years in, it really gets its hooks into you, doesn't it? So yes, early medieval Ireland, which is a totally new setting for me. I like to have to do the work every time and bring an absolutely new time and place to life. That's a lot of work, but I enjoy it so much. I just love the intricate research and trying to get into the headspace of a previous time in a faraway place. It's the psychology that interests me most, even more than the practical details of everyday life. I love that form of...
It's a novel.
Yeah. That's all I can tell you. And I've also been working on a musical, would you believe, working with a composer.
I would believe, yeah.
Well, I think because Room had songs in it. That Room wasn't a musical, I would say, but because it had songs in it, I so enjoyed the use of music in telling that story. So now I'm taking a farther step and trying to write something that's a musical from the start. Yeah.
So as usual, you have a couple of projects on the go at the same time.
Always. Right? It staves off boredom, because if on any one week you find yourself going, I don't feel like writing about medieval Ireland, you just hop to the other thing, or you can sneak off and write a short story. You just have to keep it fresh.
Speaking about hopping, are you still working with the Treadmill? Are you composing?
I am, yes. My treadmill is crucial. I'm on it, I would say, maybe 2 to 3 hours a day. And, I'm not running. I wouldn't want anyone to think that I'm like sprinting along and lashing out the short stories. But I'm ambling along, and it's great as a way of fitting exercise into my life. I think because so many people have been working from home, they're very aware that life can get sedentary if you're home all the time. If you're not, walking to work or cycling or anything. So the treadmill is just a superb way of tricking myself into doing some exercise,
But you're moving at a slow speed, presumably. You're not tearing up the...
it's a relaxed walk, yeah, because I'm actually typing as I go, yeah. Whereas, say, Dickens used to stride all over London for hours on end at top speed, apparently. So I lack his vitality, but the walking is crucial, yeah. What about you? Have you been up and down Dunleary Pier a lot these days?
There's a certain amount of that, yes, not enough, but no, just on how people write novels. It was interesting the other day to hear that Doireann Ní Ghríofa, who has a novel now, A Ghost in the Throat. If I understood correctly, she wrote that novel sitting in a parked car
I
in the
heard
car
that.
park of her
A,
child's
a
school.
rooftop
I
car
mean,
park, maybe?
it sounds incredibly cramped, but that's
You
what
know,
she needed,
I
obviously.
have written a bit in parked cars. Sometimes when I've driven the kids somewhere, I think, okay, they're only in the lesson for 45 minutes. If I sit in the waiting room, people will be looking at me funny, or everyone will be chatting. Sometimes the parked car is the best solution. So I've done that in the hot Canadian summer, for instance, park under a tree and try and lean out of the way of the sunshine. I've certainly worked sitting cross-legged on a stranger's lawn, if I was waiting for the kids outside somewhere. And I've worked, like in the lobby at the YMCA, on buses, trains, anywhere really. There's nothing will stop me. I just flip open the laptop and there I am. Hotel rooms I've written a lot in, because anytime I've been book touring in the old-fashioned sense of actually flying everywhere, I felt a bit guilty about being away from home and not there to help with the kids. And so I've tried to make up for that by getting loads of writing done. Yeah.
And do you get a sense, are people reading more, both in Canada and generally? I mean, because of
think
the
they might
lockdown,
be,
are
yeah.
people...
And certainly, book sales have been pretty healthy this year. Yeah, and I think it's been lovely to see people having time for things. I mean, I noticed, say, with Una, she's been taking up knitting in a big way. So lots of things that we were just too busy for. And I love to fill my calendar, like yourself, Dave. I'm sociable and I like to do things and, cultural experiences too. So our calendar used to be absolutely chock-a-block. And even though I chose that, I'd sometimes get a feeling of tension just glancing at the family calendar. And now it's blank and it is oddly peaceful. To have enough time for things and, the daily walks and so on. So I'm not saying I prefer life under COVID, but there are certainly things from it that I'm learning. I'll try not to go back to having quite such a mad schedule.
Where you are in London, Ontario, Emma, is there a large Irish community? I know in Toronto there is, but do you have a sense of there being many other Irish people near you?
I don't know, is it a particularly big one? I feel that there are Irish people sprinkled all across Canada, and in Ontario, it's so kind of normal to have connections to Ireland or England. I think people of, sort of British Isle stock have been in Ontario from the beginning. So it's been very culturally easy to move here. It wasn't like moving to somewhere that was a really different culture. I just felt that to be Irish here was valued and easy. So perversely, as a result of that, I've never really sought out Irish people the way I probably would have if I was in a culture where I felt more foreign, And it really helps that Canada's multiculturalism makes an immigrant feel like they're part of the mix from the beginning. I'll never forget the year I got here back in 1998. A bookseller said, "Can we put a Canadian author sticker on your book?" And I was thinking, already? So as a place to have ended up, I think Canada's been a great one for me because they really do have a very loose sense of national identity. Like whoever's here is part of it. And of course, some people must encounter racism here. It's easier if you come in as a, pale girl from Ireland. But still, I have to say that the national mindset is very much like we are made up of all our immigrants, and we have high rates of I think we have high rates of acceptance of bringing in refugees, for instance. And I think Canada is very aware that its birth rate is low, so we absolutely need our immigrants. That they're a real wealth to us, rather than us seeing them as any kind of danger. Really, Canada couldn't be more different from the States. And during COVID, I've really felt that social cohesion. I don't feel that, say, mask wearing has been painfully politicized the way it is, the way our sister in California reports that it is. And our politics are nothing like. So, I mean, we may disagree about some of our provincial or federal government's policies, but there's been no sense of a terrible rift in society over COVID. It's mostly felt as if things are very stable here.
That's interesting. And again, in broad terms, it's been the same in Ireland. I mean, if we take the example of the masks, there wasn't really any significant opposition that I could see to people being asked to wear the mask in public. Yet in Germany, for example, you have all kinds of protest movements about infringement of personal liberties. And, one has to respect it. But on the other hand, it's a different sort of mindset. Here, there was a sense that well, I'm not talking purely about the mask issue, but there was a sense that we have to sacrifice a few things for the common good in the short term, and there hasn't been any particular social unrest. But one only has to look across the Canadian-US border to see how it can go badly wrong there. And coming back to what you were saying about Canada and immigrants, I strongly agree. I've had to do some work myself on migration issues in the last few years, including when I was at the UN. There's no doubt that Canada is one of the leading lights when it comes to welcoming policies towards migrants. I think for the reason you mentioned, that migrants make up such a significant proportion of the Canadian population that there's never going to be a them and us, that we are all together as Canadians. And it's a refreshing mindset. Ireland also, I think, for different reasons, has a strong sense of the migrant identity. And I'm glad to say that Ireland also, by European standards, is one of the more forthcoming countries. For example, during the pandemic, Ireland has actually treated all immigrants here on equal terms in terms of access to social services. So irregular migrants have received the same treatment as those with papers. Now, so that's a small example of an open approach. And so Ireland and Canada, in that sense, share the same kind of perspective on migration and emigration. I mean, an issue which isn't often highlighted is how important migrants are on the front line of many countries, working in the health sector, working in providing essential services. And hopefully in some countries there will be a greater awareness when we move through COVID-19 of what migrants have actually brought to that society. So anyway, I won't get sidetracked too far.
No, I quite agree. And listen, tell me one thing, just hoping for a bit of good news, as you have such a global perspective. Are there any good effects that COVID is having on political issues in various countries? I mean, in terms of things like, political policies on non-COVID issues. Is COVID managing to shake things up in any good ways? I'm aware of many of the bad ways.
It's difficult, I suppose, because so much of the social and economic fabric of a country is affected by COVID. That such a vast amount of public expenditure has to be redirected towards tackling it. It means that most populations are under strain and governments are under strain. I'm searching for any positive dimension, but I think maybe an acceptance that I come back to the word solidarity, and again, I don't want to generalize too much from the Irish experience, but people here have been, on the whole, willing to make sacrifices, and it has, leaving aside the obvious issues of families who've suffered deaths and illness, leaving that aside, you have large numbers of people who have lost their jobs, hopefully not permanently, but so people have really made huge sacrifices. But nevertheless, there is a basic social cohesion. Now, I put that down to a kind of a pragmatism in the Irish character, which ultimately does prevail. But in other countries, sometimes that pragmatism is there, and sometimes it isn't. I mean, I won't mention particular places, but on the whole, I think we have largely got it right here. But as to whether the pandemic has actually brought in a new sense of political unanimity, I'm not sure. I mean, in many countries, it has precipitated political instability. But one thing I'm impressed by in Ireland, I have to say, is that there is a strong sense of the predicament of the most vulnerable people. So would charities who normally send funding to disadvantaged communities abroad are actually experiencing a significant increase in the funding being provided during the pandemic. And I think it's because, without wishing to sanctify the Irish, at the same time, I think we do have a sense of the huge problems being suffered in countries which are less well off. And there is a real sense of compassion and commitment that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought that out, or at least it has brought it out more fully. And all of that is good. But that, I think, has more to do with a basic Irish identification with the problems of the less advantaged populations of the world. It's not to do with COVID policies as such, but I suppose we recognise that there are countries in the world who are worse off than we are.
Yeah, I mean, my sense from say working on a novel about the 1918 flu pandemic and from reading the headlines this year is that pandemics kind of X-ray a society, show what's going on at the deepest level, and above all, they show how health is connected to everything else. I mean, a phrase I only learned this year: social determinants of health. I've become so concretely aware that there's nothing random about the movement of germs through populations. It's all to do with things like your housing conditions and your health before it happened, and your working conditions. So I've been so aware this year that poverty in the broadest sense can damage people's health in such a specific way. And when you were working on the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, you must have become terribly aware of how all these things connect.
Absolutely, and I mean, there's no doubt that migration, for example, is a key instrument to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. One in 7 human beings has some kind of migratory background. So one reason why I look at migration issues a lot at present is because migrants have been very, very badly affected by the pandemic. They've been paralyzed by border closures, by travel restrictions. In many countries, they haven't been given the same access to essential services and funding as they would in others. So in many ways, they are being treated unjustly. They're also the migrants who are, as I say, fulfilling key functions. So poverty, underdevelopment, climate change, conflict, they all create the backdrop for the most vulnerable migrants, and COVID-19 has undoubtedly exacerbated each of those issues. Inequality is now deepening in many countries because of the discrepancy between how the well-off are able to deal with and respond to the pandemic and how those less fortunate are faring. So, yeah, we have all of these global challenges which will have been sharpened and intensified by the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic, it's not going to end at a point in time. It will hopefully ease off during the coming year or two. But we have to tackle these fundamental challenges once we get some breathing space from the pandemic. What about the vaccine, Emma? Is there much talk, or what's the...
Yeah, it's just arrived in Canada. I think it was authorised about a week ago, and they've started giving the first doses just, I think, yesterday, which is all very exciting. And again, I would say while there's some what they call vaccine hesitancy in Canada, I don't think the numbers are that big. Certainly, I saw some surveys say the city of Toronto, more than 70% of people are eager to get it. So, yeah, I'm hoping that rollout will go well here. And I suppose I'm very aware, I'm 51, so I'm not top of anybody's list for it. So it's not something I expect to have myself in the short term, but I think it'll start to improve things as it goes, say, first into the long-term care homes. Ever since our mother was in a nursing home towards the end, I've been so aware of those of those people who work in long-term care homes, giving our loved ones the kind of hands-on, tireless and patient care that, some of us might be thousands of miles away from our loved ones, even before COVID. And so often it ends up being strangers, often immigrants as well, who end up doing that amazing work to look after older people. And they're a population that I probably wouldn't have been aware of before our mother. And I just saw how incredibly patient they were, explaining things. And I think of them a lot, as a working population, because they've been so vulnerable during COVID, and yet they've been doing the most crucial work.
I couldn't agree more, and that it has been a very big issue in Ireland, that the care homes have been badly hit, and I also think of the couple of nurses, you remember them as well, who looked after Frances, our mother, and who had an immigrant background. And again, that's a very good example of what I'd call the frontline worker. All I can say is, from an entirely selfish point of view, I'm so glad that Frances did not find herself still in care at the point when the pandemic hit. I mean, she would have, she would have been no more vulnerable than others, but nevertheless, it would have been a daily worry for us, I think. But anyway,
so many people have that daily worry, and they're in the perverse position of having to stay away from their loved ones in order to keep their loved ones safe, which goes against all our instincts to run in, I'm just so sorry for everyone who is worrying about faraway loved ones during this holiday period.
I must say, I think a lot also about Irish people who really would have been cocooning or in effect self-isolating abroad in many countries, who have made these enormous sacrifices. And all that they were hoping for was, at the end of the year, all they were assuming was that they would be able to get back to Ireland to see their families. And it must be very tough in human terms, where you've been looking forward to this all year, and perhaps the families here even more have been looking forward to it. But yes, because of the fact that the pandemic is going on longer than expected, and indeed it's reaching new intensity in many countries, and because of the concerns around travel, because of all these factors, it just isn't going to happen as easily as we all thought. But I suppose because we're coming up to Christmas, this is when I realise that it can be heartbreaking for many Irish people, young and old, who are abroad and who had been looking forward to this. So as I'm an immigrant twice over, right? I moved to England to do a PhD, then moved on to Canada, but I've always doubled back to Ireland. Some years I've been back 5 times, some years twice. I've always had theatre and film projects as well as friends and family, and as an immigrant, your sense of who you are is constantly reconnected and renewed by those visits home, where you feel like, okay, I'm Canadian now, but I'm also Irish still. You keep sort of checking in with those sides of yourself, and it makes you feel whole. So psychologically, it's very, very peculiar to be kept at arm's length from your home country. So I would say on my wish list, first of all, I'd love to go see our dad, who's in North Carolina. But after that, the trip I'm craving most is to be back in Dublin. I saw on Twitter they've got a lit up forest walk in Marley Park, and I nearly wept. Somehow, prospect of walking around Marley Park, I was like, oh, to be in Marley Park under the lit up trees right now, that would be gorgeous. Yes, well, you still have a very vivid recall of everything here, which is wonderful after 20 years abroad. But I suppose, Emma, we should draw the conversation to a close.
Like many an Irish conversation, it's hard to finish it, isn't it? We always go on so long.
Lots of new topics crowd into my mind. Look, the very, very best to you and Chris and Finn and Una. And we look forward to seeing you here in Ireland at some stage next year. Best of luck with the ongoing projects, and keep up the enthusiasm and the inspiration which lies behind them all. We look forward to, we'll toast you over New Year.
We'll meet again. Bye,
Okay.
Dave. This was lovely. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye, everybody listening.